Well, welcome everybody to the closing session and panel of the Knowledge Guided Machine Learning Workshop. I'm Paul Hanson from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and along with my colleague Imme Ebert-Uphoff from Colorado State University, we'll be moderating this last session. It's been a remarkable few days with 5 excellent sessions so far. I've been kind of blown away that we've ranged from genes all the way up to the planet. A lot of different and broad ranges of topical areas, and just as many or much diversity in approaches to trying to solve the interesting questions that go along with those problems. So it's been a terrific few days, and we're looking forward to this final session, which we imagine will last about an hour and a half total in length. First, we would like to acknowledge the support from the National Science Foundation through Harnessing the Data Revolution program, which provided the funding underlying the project that's running this workshop. Now, at the end of the workshop, it's time for a little bit of reflection, but mostly for looking forward. We've invited 6 panelists who've graciously agreed to lend their time and their perspective on a number of issues and questions. And the main question we've asked them is, where do we go from here? But before we get on to introducing the panelists and transitioning into panel mode, we would like to say thank you for all the behind scenes work for folks from the University of Minnesota in computer science and engineering, Michael Steenbach, Laura Connor, Ray Johnson, and also from the University of Minnesota OIT, James Fosling and David Lindemann. These folks were incredibly important for preparation for the workshop. There have been a tremendous amount of communiques that have gone out to help organize activities, website and other technology set up, invaluable advice on what might and what might not work so well for a virtual workshop that includes its own set of unique challenges, plus holding training activities before any of the workshops started. And during this workshop, we couldn't have done this without their support for sure. Every day arriving early and staying late to help us wrap things up at the end of the day. Before every one of the sessions, they've helped prepped the speakers, and they've managed the technology that's included Zoom and YouTube and Slido. And just as importantly for us, while we're live in these presentations, they're there at our fingertips, managing things in the background and constantly asking or answering questions and addressing issues that pop up. They've done an amazing job. We thank them so much for their professionalism, their enthusiasm, and really helping to make this workshop a lot of fun. So Imme, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm Imme Ebert-Uphoff from Colorado State University. And so we've seen so much enthusiasm and so many different methods and so many different avenues in which we can go that we just wanted to take this final session to discuss a little bit where we should go from here. So next slide, please. So we'll have a panel discussion, and we're very fortunate to have 6 people here who come from very different areas and have lots of different experience and perspective. So we will go in the order of listed on the screen here, and we will just let them introduce themselves for a few minutes each. And after those introductions are done, we will go into a general panel discussion. So with that, I will turn it over to Kathleen.
Well, greetings, everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers and supporters of this workshop. It's been a mind-expanding experience. It has been fast-moving, and I thought what I would do is give you some perspective on my lens that I'm bringing to this conversation. So the lens is from not machine learning, not KGML, but it's as an ecosystem scientist. I've been practicing ecosystem science for about 30 years. I've looked at air, land, and water interactions. And I also bring the perspective and the lens from supporting this kind of interdisciplinary research and interaction. And that came from, in the past, about 10 years ago, being an NSF rotating program officer, where I was able to support some really novel interdisciplinary research that kind of precedes this, as well as leading conferences where I was able to bring people together from very different disciplines and different perspectives with different analytical tools. And especially with the Global Lake Ecological Observatory Network, where Paul Hanson and many others who are involved in this and I have been able to catalyze research, catalyze interactions and new analytics. So that's the lens that I'm bringing to this workshop. So I was asked the question about, which directions am I excited about? And for the specifics in terms of ecosystem science, I'm really interested in the opportunity to understand a little bit more about where biology matters, where these models can reveal biologic interactions, or where biology is important in the context of biogeochemistry. I'm also interested in what Paul and others mentioned about what we can learn about what we don't know about ecological systems from KGML. And what I'm most excited about actually is that this framework, I think, offers us an opportunity, a platform for interdisciplinary research, for bringing people together from different disciplines and really advancing the science and also practicing team science. So I really appreciated the knowledge-based learning is unicorn space that was offered up by Charlika on the first day. And I think that it's a great way to look forward to this opportunity that KGML offers us. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Ryan Lagerquist. So I think I'm newer than most people on the panel here. I recently got my PhD back in April from the University of Oklahoma in the School of Meteorology. So my entire background is in meteorology. All 3 degrees have been in either atmospheric science or meteorology, but I started doing applied machine learning about 8.5 years ago, and I haven't looked back since then. So I've done applied machine learning for atmospheric science with organizations like Environment Canada, Google, SIMS, the Cooperative Institute for Mesoscale Studies, and I'm currently a postdoc with CIRA, which is the Cooperative Institute for Research in the Atmosphere at Colorado State University, as well as NOAA/ESRO/GSL. So a really long laundry list of associations there. So the stuff that I've been working on for the last 2 or 2.5 years is interpretable deep learning. So I switched all my work over to convolutional neural networks and UNets and LSTM and other fancy deep learning methods about 2.5 years ago. And when I started using these fancy deep learning methods, I discovered that they're more of a black box than the previous methods that I was used to, like decision trees, for example. These models weren't immediately human readable. I couldn't immediately just look at the tens of millions of weights in a UNet and figure out exactly what the UNet was doing and how and why it was making its decisions. So that kicked off this effort to not really develop my own interpretation methods, but implement other people's interpretation methods to look into the black box and figure out what was going on inside these deep neural networks. And that kind of ballooned, and that turned into my main research area. It kind of crept up on me in a weird way. So the stuff that I'm excited about is using interpretable machine learning. That's primarily the angle that I'm coming from in terms of knowledge-guided machine learning, but also being a domain expert in the domain that I'm applying machine learning to, I found has been a big deal as well. Being a meteorologist who also knows the machine learning instead of being a data scientist coming at the meteorology. So yeah, what I'm most excited about is using interpretable machine learning to create more trustworthy models. So to have models that break less often, but also to better characterize the behavior of the models so that you know the types of situations in which they break. So you know the types of situations in which you should trust a machine learning model and the types of situations in which you shouldn't, because we're never going to have a perfect machine learning model. There's always going to be failure modes. So you need to understand what the failure modes are. And if you can create more trustworthy and understandable models, you build more trust in the end users. Also, I'm excited about making the end users more savvy, just educating end users, for example, operational forecasters in the National Weather Service forecast offices across the country, they're starting to use machine learning products like the ones that I develop operationally. And I really like teaching atmospheric scientists about machine learning, not necessarily to become practitioners, but just to become savvy users and to know what to look out for. Also using interpretable machine learning to accelerate knowledge discovery. That's something that I've kind of dabbled in over the last year and a half, and I haven't had a chance to fully launch a project on that. But I'm really excited about the opportunities for using interpretation to discover completely new scientific knowledge. I'm also excited about physically constrained machine learning, physically constrained interpretation methods. I've started doing some work where I look at the output from interpretation methods like saliency maps and layer-wise relevance propagation and whatnot, and I apply significance tests to those maps to make sure that what I'm discovering isn't just noise created by the size of the grid or something like that. Using machine learning to accelerate and improve physical models. Those 3 bullet points in the middle are all kind of things that I've just started getting into in the last few months in my postdoc. And then the last few bullet points are things that I haven't really played with yet, but things that I'm excited about nonetheless. So transfer learning, meta learning, which we've heard a lot about this week, causal modeling, which we've heard a lot about this week, and machine learning systems that interact with end users. So maybe a machine learning system that could learn online where an end user could say, hey, this prediction is wrong, or this interpretation map looks wonky. It would be really interesting if you could have a machine learning system that learns online by getting feedback from the human domain experts. So I'll stop talking now.
So am I supposed to introduce myself? Sorry, my name is Gray Nearing. I'm from the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. I'm currently also visiting faculty at Google Research on the flood forecasting team in Tel Aviv. And my background is with hydrological modeling teams. So I got my PhD in hydrology. So I'm very much a domain scientist by education in 2013, and then spent the majority of my time both during and after my PhD on hydrological modeling teams at NASA and INCAR, with a little bit of work with NOAA and the USDA. And I mentioned that just to kind of give you a sense of where I come from, although most of my work through that whole time, and especially more, well, through the whole time I've been in the field, has been really based around machine learning. And basically the perspective that I take in my particular discipline is that we've known for a quarter century that machine learning is really has a lot to offer in the field, and it's been a slow ramp up to sort of convince the community to take this seriously and to fund these things. In hydrology in particular, several of the major funding organizations in the United States and Europe sort of have actual explicitly won't fund pure machine learning work in these in at least in hydrology, because it's not related to process understanding. And I think over the last 10 years, this has certainly started to change in the last 12 to 18 months. But in the last 10 years, there's been one of the things that's happened in our field that's kind of been perplexing to me, is that we've known that machine learning works really, really well, better at some of the main tasks that our discipline tries to solve, and information that we try to provide to the world. The machine learning works really well, but we've never really made a serious effort to capitalize on that. And so I'm really excited that the world's moving in that direction, and I'm excited to see conferences like this happen. And what this signals to me is that maybe there's now potential to kind of capitalize on a lot of the work that's happened in computer science disciplines and in the private sector around the world for the last 20 or 30 years in data science and machine learning. We're certainly 20 to 30 years behind in hydrology, and we need to catch up. And so I'm really excited to see this happening. And my personal particular interest is in knowledge-guided machine learning in particular is hypothesis testing. So one of the things that we struggle with when building giant comprehensive models of global, the global water cycle, global hydrological systems, and I think this is true for at least a lot of earth science systems, not all of them, but a lot, is that it's really hard to do hypothesis tests. It's really hard to do hypothesis testing to improve. It's really difficult to improve the models in a very targeted way, because all the models consist of hundreds of little tiny subcomponents, and each one of those subcomponents is a little bit wrong, and it's a little bit wrong for different reasons in different parts of the world and under different conditions. And so when you go in and you sit down with one of these big global hydrology models and you think, what am I going to do to improve this? You have to, basically what happens is any idea you have to test that idea in the context of this whole sort of machinery around the thing that's already wrong. And so this has been a real impediment to improving global models of the water cycle. And I think that what I'm most excited about with machine learning and the empirical fact that machine learning is finding significantly more information in our observational data sets about the global water cycle than we've been able to use before with our sort of science-driven understanding. That's exciting to me because I think it opens up the possibility to do real hypothesis testing in complex systems.
All right, thank you, Greg. And Imme, Paul, and Vipin, I want to thank you for inviting me to this panel. So I'm Prabhat. I work at the NERSC Supercomputing Center at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I'm a computer scientist by training, and my day job is figuring out what the data and AI strategy needs to be for the NERSC systems. NERSC supports a very broad set of users. So we support around 7,000 scientists and 800 different projects. And I have visibility into how AI has been applied historically to problems in cosmology, astronomy, earth sciences, genomics, high energy physics, nuclear physics, and so on. So I think the directions I guess I'm going to propose next are really guided by the very practical issues that scientists face. Often again, we go in as evangelists in that, hey, AI and deep learning is cool. You can potentially add in knowledge-guided machine learning techniques. But the kinds of pushback I think that we are starting to see now in domain sciences at Berkeley Lab, at NERSC, are of the following type. So I think there are two broad classes of applications. You can apply machine learning, AI, deep learning to solving analytics problems, so finding patterns in data, doing clustering, so on and so forth. And I think the challenges there are really around being able to explain why the network is doing what it is doing, or being able to interpret what the network has done in terms of semantic features peculiar to your domain science. So I think those are really key challenges now. I think we are seeing that domain scientists aren't necessarily comfortable with putting up a state-of-the-art classification result in front of their community without necessarily being able to say, here's a block diagram of a complicated network with such and such convolution layers and so on and so forth, but I can't explain how it works. So I think that bit is turning out to be a challenge. Also, I think one of the very practical issues that people seem to struggle with right now is supervised learning works, but we really don't have a sense for how much training data do we need to train our networks successfully. So that's, I think, an issue that we are seeing across the board. Now, places like NERSC, other supercomputing centers have obviously supported simulation workloads for 40 years. And the proposition really on the table is that we can potentially improve, enhance, and in some cases even replace conventional PD solvers by deep learning methods. And I think that certainly gets a lot of people upset. And I think the kinds of pushback that we are starting to see is really around the lines of, can you prove to me when your network generalizes? So I think it's becoming clear that interpolation problems are easy for such networks to solve. But exactly characterizing when you are not able to extrapolate, that's a key issue. Now, I think the other really conceptual issue, so when I compare the sophistication of computational modeling as facilitated by applied math over the last 40 years, and I compare that protocol to how we approach deep learning, you throw in more data, you throw in a more complex model. That protocol is really not very sophisticated. And I think higher level issues of, should I be using deep learning at all? Should I be using statistical modeling instead, or some other conventional machine learning method? Which type of deep learning architecture I should be using? When can I trust whether my deep learning model has produced the right result? I think those sorts of conceptual issues are really turning out to be a problem. And I'm hoping that this particular community of researchers and program managers and others can support these kinds of problems that our users at NERSC need. Thank you.
All right, so I'm Jordan Reed from the U.S. Geological Survey. I think also representing an agency perspective in this conversation. So my background is a little bit more similar to others than I guess I was expecting it, in that I've come from a more pure process-based training background. So I got my PhD from UW-Madison in environmental fluid mechanics. I came out of a lab that specialized at the time in three-dimensional non-hydrostatic modeling for lakes and reservoirs. And with that as a starting point, that wasn't my research in particular, but as a starting point, kind of bridging out to aquatic ecologists and others that were interested in physical models of lakes and reservoirs as kind of a collaborative point. And through that work, I was developing some of my own process-based models and contributing code to others, and kind of recognizing this this failure where ultimately I'm either going to add more complexity, more empirical knobs, or more process-based formulations to a model like that, or I'm going to acknowledge that, you know, the pattern in the residuals for this model, you know, is something that could benefit from just stepping back from that process-based approach and looking into direct collaborations in machine learning. So that's what kind of tipped me in the other direction on that path for how modeling tasks are accomplished, to start approaching it with more of this hybrid knowledge-guided machine learning, or some of the other phrases that we've used to connect that, how I've approached that. And within the work that I do, I lead a data science capability, so specifically a branch within the U.S. Geological Survey's water mission that focuses on data science and knowledge-guided machine learning, or process-guided deep learning, as we sometimes refer to it, is one of three capabilities that we have in that branch, the other two being a focus on large-scale reproducible data pipelines, and then also how we communicate both what models are doing and other environmental patterns and phenomena through data visualization. So those are the three focus areas for our branch of right now 12 employees at USGS. But of course, I'm here to talk mostly about the knowledge-guided machine learning components of our work. The work that we're currently doing right now is focused on using flow, so discharge at regional to potentially national scale, as a target, so that we can make potentially better predictions of how much water is being conveyed at any given point in time, and also being able to say something about the two extremes, so not just about when the flooding might happen, but also drought conditions. And then additionally connecting that to more or to additionally ecosystem relevant variables, such as water temperature, as kind of a master variable, that from that we can understand things like fish growth and reproduction, all the way to potentially the likelihood of harmful algal blooms. So we've been approaching modeling and predictions that attempt to in some cases combine both of those variables in this hybridized sense of bringing traditional process-based knowledge to the table, and also combining it with some more advanced deep learning approaches. And then I think you've seen some of the work that we're either affiliated with, or in some cases leading, about putting these predictions to use. Point out Allison Appling's talk earlier this week. Allison is in our group, and then Jared Willard is also collaborating with us. He's out of University of Minnesota, and he presented on some work that we're working on for predictions in unmonitored systems as well. So that's kind of the broad topic or broad set of topics of what really we're putting energy behind right now for KGML. But I think the perspective that I would add here that I hope is somewhat unique on the panel is working at a science agency that has a large modeling initiative. So USGS is the science agency for the interior, has a large modeling initiative and a refinement of that modeling strategy that has over many decades been built upon the accumulation of process knowledge and formulating that into models. Meanwhile, also very rich history in data. So some of the earliest USGS accounting for the water in the nation, happens to go all the way back to the 1800s. And we've had a really strong data program alongside, and also that work has resulted in many strong empirical models. But what some of these conversations are moving towards is really those two camps coming together, and some of the awkwardness in taking a traditional process-based model and say, for example, a deep learning approach, and finding the common ground, finding places where we can use both in a forward-looking modeling strategy into the future, because ultimately we're a science agency that needs to find real applications for the work. So if our predictions of water availability in the West aren't good enough for decision making, then we need to, in some cases, kind of put our pride aside about what makes the best, the most pure model, and think instead about, in some cases, what would be giving us better predictions for these particular stakeholder needs. So in many ways, KGML is really an important conversation starter across those often divided camps of process-based researchers and empirical researchers. So that's kind of the first of the bullet points of these future directions that I'm excited about in particular. The second is KGML meets data assimilation, or you could talk about that more broadly as KGML to be used for forecasting. And I would say my interest in this is largely to support those that either also work in the data science branch or have research that is affiliated with this. So we've got a postdoc, Jake Zwart, who is really interested in this topic and has been participating in KGML work and is also leading data science or data assimilation research right now for stream temperature forecasting. And so I'm really excited about the different ways that we can take real-time data, be it in situ sensors giving us real-time information, or the potential for more remotely sensed variables to allow us to make improvements on our forecasts with an approach that would take the best of what we've learned so far with KGML. And then the last bullet, of course, here is related to the first, which is I'm really, really excited about the potential to work knowledge-guided machine learning into a science agency strategy on how we're going to move forward, for the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and potentially the next 30 years on Earth science predictions. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cathy Wu. I have my educational background in both biology and computer science. And so this is really a very exciting time to conduct research at the interface of biological sciences and computational sciences. So currently I'm a professor at Georgetown University Medical Center. And also I'm Jefferson Chair Professor in Engineering and Computer Science at University of Delaware. So I have my research team at both UD and Georgetown University. So after I moved to University of Delaware about 11 years ago, I established Center for Bioinformatics and Computational Biology. And just a couple years ago, we also established the Data Science Institute to bring together, again, researchers across campus. So at University of Delaware, I'm really quite passionate about training educational programs. So we have launched a number of bioinformatics degree programs. So the master's, professional science masters in bioinformatics and computational biology. We established PhD program in bioinformatics data science. And we also have graduate certificate and online graduate certificates in bioinformatics and in biomedical informatics and data science. And so it really creates an excellent opportunity for us to have very vibrant research collaboration in a training environment. And certainly to build this kind of research infrastructure, it's also very important that we have core facilities. And so we have established a bioinformatics core at the Center for Bioinformatics Computational Biology. And at the Data Science Institute, we established a data intensive and computational sciences core to provide research infrastructure, again, to support both research and educational programs and research collaboratives with our partner institutions. In terms of my own research, I have been conducting bioinformatics, computational biology, data science research for over 25 years now in areas from genomics to protein sequence structure, function annotation, to natural language processing, text mining, to ontology and semantic modeling, to big data analysis, and certainly use a number of machine learning, deep learning methodologies. And so this morning in the translational biology session, I just gave a talk on how we integrate the text mining, data mining, and semantic computing to help derive biomedical knowledge networks that allow us to do gene disease drug type of discovery for diseases from Alzheimer's diseases to COVID-19. And so again, more and more the research really is quite broad encompassing that require us to bring in the technology, the methodologies, and the thinking from different fields to address very complex problems, whether we are talking about translational biology or any other application domains. So which KGML directions am I most excited about? I'm really very excited about the possibility of the KGML framework that can foster collaborations for translational biology and team science to help knowledge-guided discovery for biology, fundamental biology, for precision medicine, for digital agriculture. And so it's really, whether we are looking at fundamental understanding of biological principles, the biological networks, or whether we are looking at biomedical, pharmaceutical, and agricultural applications, the impact is very broad encompassing. So, and certainly we are looking at very complex data. We talk about multimodality data from genomics to bioimaging, looking at data from genotypes to phenotypes. How do we bring in the impact of environmental factors, the lifestyles, information capturing wearables, sensors, electronic health record, GIS mapping, and so forth. All these temporal spatial dimensions, how do we model disease progression over time? How do we model variation across population, across geographical locations? And so in a way, the harnessing data revolution to really accelerate research in data science really require this type of interdisciplinary collaboration across fields that impact our society. So at Data Science Institute at University of Delaware, we bring together faculty students from all 8 colleges across campus, from health sciences, physical sciences, environmental sciences, to behavioral, social sciences, and public policy. We have a dozen new hires in the last couple of years joining the Data Science Institute as resident faculty, and they complement expertise from more than 100 affiliated faculty members in the Data Science Institute. And so it's really a very exciting time. We are extremely delighted to participate in this knowledge-guided machine learning working group to contribute, I think, in both the foundational development of the framework and the applications of the framework. So KGML, in my mind, is really an ideal framework for collaboration, for translational biology, for team science. It can really help bring together multidisciplinary researchers at the interface of biomedical computational sciences for both research and training initiatives. Within the KGML initiative, I'm particularly interested in the data science aspect from data acquisition, data cleansing, pre-processing, and how do we go about encode features to develop training models to do post-processing and interpretation. again, the key is how do we capture the kind of expert knowledge from biology, from biomedicine, in this kind of iterative feedback loop throughout the entire modeling process, from pre-processing to post-processing, so that we can really accomplish the goal of interpretable AI. And so that, I think that's exactly how it is being embraced in this workshop, to bring together domain scientists, computational scientists, data scientists all together. And again, I think this is going to be extremely exciting initiative going forward, adopting this framework to see how we can all collaborate and really develop the kind of modules, the kind of workflows that allow our applications in different domain areas to crosstalk.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for the introductions and your thoughts on this topic. So we would like to invite the audience also to submit questions. We have prepared lots of questions for the panelists, but we would like to mix in some from the audience. So use that slide link over here or go to the workshop webpage. The main workshop webpage also has a link to this. Next slide, please. So the question we prepared fall into 4 different themes. Number 1 is research, 2 is data and software infrastructure, 3 is education, and 4 is fostering cross-disciplinary collaboration. And let's always remember, this is all in the context of how can we advance knowledge guide machine learning in the future? Where do we go from here? And we talked a little bit in the 30-minute check-in time for the panelists. Paul and I asked the panelists, which of these topics are you most excited to talk about? And the great majority of people said number 3 and number 4. Education and fostering cross-disciplinary collaboration. And these are probably the hardest topics to discuss in a workshop, and so we didn't have technical talks on those. And so we'll probably spend most of this panel discussion on those, but we don't want to neglect number 1 and 2 either. So we will start with topics 1 and 2, but we wouldn't be surprised if they go relatively quickly. And then we hope to reserve a lot of time for education and fostering cross-disciplinary collaboration. With that, yes. Let me start with the first question for research. So one question that we heard that throughout the workshop that many people had is that there are lots of new technologies being discussed here. We've seen so many different areas. So there are many choices. How do you choose the right direction from those? Say you're new to this and you heard about all these different techniques at KGML. How do you know which one you should first start with? Anybody want to take that one?
I can chime in, Imme, I guess. And by technologies, you'd mean methods. So deep learning methods, for instance. Yeah, so I would say
methods like probably the KGML methods, like, like explainability or transfer learning, or those kind of. Yeah.
Yes, I think first thing to maybe acknowledge upfront is that this is a very dynamic area and it's going to keep evolving. I mean, there's just no way that we've converged on the kinds of deep learning architectures that are going to work, the kinds of techniques that are going to work. Probably some of the grand challenge problems around bias and ethics and our variants of generalization and interpretability, explainability, they're going to persist for maybe 5 or 6 or 10 years. But really, in terms of new techniques being developed, that's going to keep changing all the time. So I think for me, having struggled with this over the last 5 or 6 years in trying to digest and then educate scientists about what they should do, because again, if you're a biologist or a chemist, you're really not inclined to read NeurIPS papers every week or keep up with archive. There's just too much going on. So I think first, just broadly in terms of applicability of deep learning at all to your problem, I think it's clear that if, depending on your data, if you have 2D data, 3D data, space-time data, you can come up with convolutional architectures that work. Or if you have sequence data, you can come up with LSTM architectures that work. If you want to generate or synthesize data, you can work on GANs. Now, when it comes to imposing now KGML techniques on these basic architectures, I think a lot of success that we are seeing right now seems to be when you impose the constraint in terms of a loss function augmentation. So you just augment the loss with whatever thing it is that you want to conserve. And that's, we're seeing some progress there. Some people are trying to innovate on the architecture itself. So come up with a different style of an architecture that can, more accurately represent the domain that you care about. So I would say that maybe broadly, just in terms of the deep learning mechanics, those are probably reasonably generic approaches to take. I don't think I have, further sort of informed thoughts on any guiding principles on what technique is going to work for your problem for sure, or what won't, or should you wait a year or two for someone else from Google Brain to develop the method that you can then adopt or use in your science problem. I think it's a little too early to generalize. Anyway, those are just some preliminary thoughts.
Yeah, other thoughts from folks? Well, I'd like to jump in with a very closely related follow-up about technologies too, which is a number of you have raised, and we've heard it, I think, throughout the week, that one of the greatest challenges is drawing inference from the models that are trained and then that are applied. And so I'm wondering, and I know, Imme, you actually have some expertise in this area too, but I'm wondering, what are the technological opportunities or places to go, or how would you, first approach either trying to discover those technologies, or how would you explain, to one of your colleagues who's not very familiar with, the black box model approach, how do you begin that kind of interpretation?
Imme, do you want to make a comment?
If you want to go ahead, that's fine. I follow you.
So I guess you mentioned 2 or 3 things there, Paul. So maybe let me get to the explainability part. Perhaps that's a key consideration, and certainly a challenge that I've had personally. We've had really quick and easy success stories in downloading TensorFlow, training a convolutional architecture, somehow arranging for data, getting a state-of-the-art result. Now the question is, I want to give a talk at AGU or AMS, and I need to explain to non-deep learning experts what's going on. So it almost feels like there is an obligation to have a tutorial on deep learning with every scientific talk, and that doesn't work. I mean, that's just, you can't do justice to the deep learning bit or the science application or the unique challenges in the science application in 30 minutes. That's not happening. So I think what we are trying to do really strategically is, separate out, have a one-day tutorial or a workshop on basics of deep learning, wherein hopefully the community becomes a little more used to seeing building blocks of convolutional architectures and fully connected networks and skip connections and so on and so forth. So I'm just hoping that with time, enough people in the community will be educated on the basic architecture of deep learning, so that when the time comes for folks to give technical talks, they can just put up a block diagram saying, here is the unique architecture that I used. I had 16 layers, 2 layers of this type, 14 layers of the other type. This is the training protocol that I used, stochastic gradient descent with such and such hyperparameters. And now if you wanted to do this by yourself, go and download the code base and you'd be set. Now, is that going to be enough? For scientists, I'm not sure. I think there is still some degree of dissatisfaction with just looking at a block diagram and saying, okay, there are 10 million parameters there. What is this network doing anyway? So I hope that, in future scientific presentations accompanying this block diagram, we would have a subsequent slide wherein there are standard visualization tools that are applied, so that we can visually inspect or illustrate the hierarchy of, say, features that the network has learned. And so even
Ryan, sorry, Prabhat. I see, Ryan, you nodding in assent, especially to Prabhat's last point, and I know you're passionate about this. Would you care to jump in and add?
Yeah, I may just be piling on at this point. I don't know if I was planning on actually saying anything or not, but yeah, I've found that when I give these presentations and these tutorials and whatnot, so part of my teaching background is these tutorials that Prabhat was talking about that happen at AMS and AGU and other earth science conferences. I've done a lot of teaching for those tutorials. So when and I give presentations at these conferences as well. So when I'm trying to explain deep learning and neural nets to people, I notice a lot of eyes glazing over until I get to the slide where I show them the visualization tools. but I make sure when I show them the visualization tools, the visualization figures I'm showing are applied to the problem at hand. So it's applied to weather data. And often I see in these applied machine learning papers, people will have a figure or 2 or 3 of them trying to explain what a convolutional neural net is, for example. And the schematics they use are all applied to toy data, like pictures of cats and dogs. And that's great, but just because you can understand how CNNs classify pictures of cats and dogs doesn't mean you can understand how CNNs classify the difference between tropical and extratropical cyclones, or warm fronts and cold fronts, or tornadic and non-tornadic storms. So I think it's a lot of work, but it's worth putting the work into the visualizations. So not only applying the right interpretation and explainability methods, but it's worth putting the work into making really good visualizations that incorporate the data that you actually use. So if you want to explain how a CNN does tornado prediction, show pictures of storms, show how a CNN creates features for a tornadic storm versus a non-tornadic storm, because that'll really drive it home to the people who are domain experts and understand storms, but don't understand the deep learning part of it. So.
Yep, terrific. So yeah, go
follow
ahead.
up on that one?
Yep.
So just very briefly, following up on what Ryan just said, you can of course take it one step further and say, not only do we want to have methods for explainable AI, like all these neural network visualization methods, we also want to talk, in our case, to the meteorologists and ask them, what is a valid explanation for you? So we're just starting to talk to social scientists about how to hook up with meteorologists to actually develop explanations that are not meaningful to computer scientists, but meaningful to the domain scientist. So I think that's one of the things that we really have to push, is to say, okay, explanations have to be specific to what domain experts, how they think, right? So I think that's the next big challenge that we should be attacking, is to actually really have everybody from the computer science to the domain expert work together so that the explanations we come up with are actually meaningful to the domain scientist. And with that, I would.
So Jordan,
and I think, sorry.
Yeah, let me pop over to Jordan really quickly, and then to Gray after that. Jordan, you had pointed out the chasm, I guess, between machine learning and process-based modeling in an organization where you're producing products that the public consumes. Can you just agree to disagree, or do you have to convince your colleagues of the value of these alternative approaches? How do you do that?
Yeah, I would say the easy way is to agree to disagree, because there's enough projects and there are enough problems to solve where you can create a multi-decadal career by simply doing your work the way you prefer to do it. And I think that's true not just in a agency the size of USGS, but also in academia and elsewhere and other agencies. That is not my interest. I think making progress within the community to find that common ground is really hard work right now. But I think that's got the greatest payout. I mean, if we're operating in a small niche on kind of the side of the organization on moving ML forward or something, and doing that kind of outside the major modeling strategy, that can be a success for your individual career. Maybe you're getting enough publications to kind of rise through, but at the end of the day, that's not the reason I'm part of the survey. I would much rather be part of the other discussions that kind of get uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable because it is a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift as evident by the fact that it makes a lot of people really nervous on both sides to have these conversations. Yeah. But we need to have them. We need to move forward. And one comment I kind of wanted to make about the very first question on research about tools. This isn't an answer to the tooling question, but I think it's a general thing that I would give as advice to anybody hopping in on this work is pride is going to hold you back. So the pride, you need to kind of drop the pride, know that you need to ask for help. There are a lot of experts in small slices of this field that you should go to. And also the pride is going to get in the way of finding this common ground. Like if me as a process-based model cannot admit that there are real flaws or there's cooked in empiricism within my model, that's going to hold us back. And likewise, if I'm a machine learning specialist and can't see the value in, all of the knowledge, all of the previous constructions of models that have gotten us to this far, then, I'm going to have a blind spot there too. So yeah, just something to add to that.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
And,
I'm sorry.
And I think go beyond the domain scientist who can consume the data and the results with the help of AI machine learning scientists. We also need to provide confidence, because there are a lot of misconceptions from the general public and policymakers regarding AI machine learning. And so I think it's also our responsibility to have those type of engagement with the end users and policymakers to make sure that this kind of AI machine learning results really, when they contribute to the better understanding of the science, that they would embrace it.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Gray, I cut you off a couple of minutes ago. Care to jump in?
Yeah, I'd just say I really wanted to follow up on Imme's comment about, sorry if I mispronounced your name, apologies, about what explainability means. This has been a really interesting phenomenon to me, where we would give presentations about machine learning, and we really come to a point where we feel like we really kind of understand what the machine learning models are doing. And then someone like a more traditional process-based scientist will be in the crowd and say, well, the model is a black box, it lacks explainability. First of all, we've heard the word black box a lot, so I just want to throw this out there. I think that I strongly disagree that machine learning are black boxes. I think at this point that's pretty much a non sequitur, and I think that I think that's a choice we can make. We can see them as black boxes if we decide not to learn the techniques that people use to look inside them. Anyway, I just want to point out that the challenge that I've had in sort of transferring what I understand about these models to other people is that our definitions of explainability are different, and that it's so awesome that Imme said that's a social science problem. It's a philosophy of science problem. It's a social science problem, and I think there'd be really interesting projects in this domain to bring in people that are thinking about computer scientists do this all the time, but in our subdomain in earth science, we could bring in people to think about what it means to be explainable and work with the computer scientists. I did want to say one more thing, just to follow up on Jordan's comment about there's enough work here to build a career, and you can agree to disagree, and everyone can have a successful career, and we can solve a lot of the problems. I would just point out a little bit that there's something of a zero-sum game here, because the funding in science is fundamentally competitive, and just to sort of illustrate what I mean by this, I don't think this is a real serious thing, but just to illustrate why I think, to emphasize what Jordan was saying, it's sort of why I think it's important that we don't settle for the agree to disagree, and we really look for truly, as a community, understanding the value of all these different types of technologies and how we can mix that value. Just to give a tangible example, in the world right now, in my world, I build global hydrology models. These things do things like support the lower boundary condition for weather forecasts and for climate projections and for water resource management tools, droughts and floods and hydropower operations. And I just point out that there are at least a dozen global hydrology models that are used regularly in the world. They cost several $1 million a year to develop. We've been developing them for decades, and there's not one of those that's based in AI. And so there is a little bit of a zero-sum game here going on in terms of where we place the emphasis for the things that actually affect what the decisions that we make in the real world. Okay, thanks.
Fair enough.
Can I just add to that a little bit? Gray, I really like your idea of thinking about having philosophers or science of team science folks kind of look at the philosophical underpinnings and challenges. I think that would be a great project. I think that there's hope, responding to Jordan's comment, there's hope in a way that there hasn't been before, I think, with models and people's provenance over models, having models be my career. And that's as part of open science. It's part of just a whole new generation of the way in which we generate models. And so I think that going forward, there is a lot of hope there just because the culture has changed. The other thing that I would say is when Vipin opened, he talked about KGML without ignoring the treasure of accumulated scientific knowledge. And what I'd suggest is what we're looking for is fully embracing scientific knowledge, not without ignoring. So I think that, again, there's real hope with going back and forth with domain knowledge and ML.
All right, anybody else on this topic before we move on to the next question? All right, so the next question, I would actually like to take a question from the audience, which is perfect because it also leads us to topic B, the data and software infrastructure. And the question is, the workshop has tons of information. Is there a place to document the available open source codes and form a library of most recent references? Any thoughts on that? And maybe it's a question of what we need to create. I don't know.
I guess everyone's quiet, so it means that there isn't an obvious solution. I mean, certainly, in terms of papers, there are systems for keeping your archive sanity. So essentially, customized archive feeds that you can look at to track deep learning papers, say, of interest. At a place like a university, it can sometimes be a little difficult to maintain data archives and source codes for an extended period of time beyond the grant that you're working on. I think that's really where supercomputing centers in the NSF and DOE can help out. I mean, I think they can come up with a longer term strategy for publishing data, ensuring that it's available for a longer period of time. And similarly, in terms of source code, ensuring that through mechanisms like either Jupyter notebooks or container technologies, you're pushing out code that can hopefully be used in the future. So I can speak for maybe on the NERSC side. I think we do have plans for, I mean, we've had data repositories for a long time, right? So the CMIP5 community in the climate science is a great example of a community that's published data for a while, and there is a whole infrastructure that accompanies that. Not all communities are well funded to be able to deploy infrastructure at that scale. But one can work in collaboration with supercomputing centers and push it out there. And obviously, you can also work with cloud vendors these days to ensure that things are available in the long run. But I would say that there's no simple answer at this point in time. And this issue is not unique to KGML. I think this is an issue that's plagued science for a very long time. And unfortunately, I think there's just a lot to take on, and we just don't quite have the right grants to support academics to develop infrastructure of this type.
I guess it's also a question of community building in terms of, is anybody willing to take the initiative to do something like this? But it's a big effort. So if anybody knows of a resource that lists KGML related papers already, feel free to put that in Slido as well. If you know of something that exists, but it's probably something we should think about creating.
I'll note that there are Vipin is not speaking up, but obviously there are review papers that have come out. So, from Vipin's group and others who try to synthesize latest developments in KGML and call out, however you want to spread that space, have pointers to a bunch of related work. So those articles have done a reasonable job. But it's very early days. So really, I think we would expect the definitive KGML reference articles to really be published 2 or 3 years from now.
All right. Any more thoughts on that? And can somebody from the audience put Vipin's review paper from archive in Slido so that everybody can see it? I think that would be useful to have that link there. If not, I can put there a little later. Moving on to the next question in terms of data and software infrastructure. What are the challenges in open sharing of data, algorithms, and models in the context of KGML? And maybe mixing in the second question as well, is it possible to develop KGML benchmarks that include data, task, algorithm, and performance metrics that would be useful across multiple disciplines? I will just throw both of those questions out. Anybody can answer any of those. And the reason why I'm throwing them both out is because we want to move on also soon to education and the cross-disciplinary collaboration. So any thoughts on those two questions?
I can speak to the first question, the challenges in open sharing of data, algorithms, and models. So my whole experience with this is that I started doing machine learning and doing science research as an undergrad, and then throughout grad school, obviously continued with that. And documentation and coding practice and making sure that everything was consistent and available and open source and usable was not really emphasized for any of the research that I did. That type of stuff, if I documented my code at all, or cleaned up my code at all, or cleaned up my data set to make it shareable, that type of stuff was always ad hoc. It was never really emphasized. It was always, get the research project done and move on to the next thing. And I think that's often the strategy and the attitude in academia and also in government. And then as a PhD student, I ended up having an internship with a private company. I went over to Google, and I was absolutely shocked that my supervisor had to read and approve every single line of code that I wrote and committed to the repository. And it was a really slow learning curve for the first month. I was like, my God, he's got to go through tens of thousands of lines of code, and we have to agree on every single line of code. But it really opened my eyes to the difference in practices between private industry and academia / government, or I guess between private industry and the more research oriented community. So the challenges in open sharing are just that often when you get code from another scientist or another researcher, it's not documented. You have no idea what the variable names are. It's not unit tested. You have no idea if the code works and is doing what it says it's doing. You don't know where the bugs are in the code, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a huge challenge in sharing algorithms and sharing models, is that often the code just isn't documented and may not be trustworthy. And then when it comes to the open sharing of data as well, I feel like we've gotten better at this, at least in the atmospheric science community over the last few years, in having standard data formats. Most of the time these days, when someone sends me new data for a new project, it's in an HDF5 file or it's in a NetCDF file, and it's pretty well documented. The metadata is there and I can figure things out. But often I still come across data sets that there's just a zoo of different data formats that are used in the community. And often there's no metadata that comes along with the data itself. So you don't know where the data come from. You don't know how to read the data. You don't know how quality controlled the data is. You don't know how much you can trust the data. So yeah, in terms of the academic / government community versus private industry, I feel like we're, although we've made strides in the last few years that I've noticed, I feel like we're still quite far behind in making sure that things are documented and consistent and reusable. So that's a really, really huge challenge.
This reminds me very much, Jordan, of your role sort of straddling the research community and agency community. And, the ad hoc nature of academia and the environment that Ryan just described is one that a lot of us still live in. But I also know that you've led the effort, at least in the aquatics area, of organizing code, publishing code, and making sure code is resilient. Would you be willing to comment on that crossover?
Yeah, I think to add a few things, at least within the USGS, and I'm not sure how wide these movements have expanded, but there is a good policy pressure on releasing code and data. I know that's not an answer to Paul's direct question about kind of more community-based push on developing code, but so within USGS, we have formal data releases which are required to be associated with any publication that we have. So also publishing the underlying data. We also have model archivals. So if we build or develop or use an existing model, we need to have an outward archive of that model with data that can run it and the metadata required so that someone else can pick it up and make use of it. I would say that I'm certain that both of those two requirements will evolve in the future as more experience or as the agency and other users of the data have more and more experience. And I think that those pieces will kind of harden and formalize in very positive ways. But at least, you know, the combination of requiring open source publications in many cases, data releases, and model archivals, that covers a lot of the ground that I would say is pretty brittle elsewhere. So I think that's exciting. And then to speak to Paul's real question, I think this movement, kind of more community-based movement that a lot of us have been a part of, I think I've been one member of many that are excited about formalizing code and getting, in some cases, getting graduate students excited about contributing to something that might not be a lead author paper, but might be a software product that will live on and others can use in the future, and start getting people to think about how those artifacts can exist and help support your career, you know, in a totally separate and different way than a key paper can do that. And also the way that we use code to develop, you know, real lasting relationships with how we collaborate on code, how we respond to someone's pull request to a code repository that I might oversee, how we engage. I think that's an exciting additional dimension that can be used as part of the community building in any kind of data-centric, forward-looking work. I mean, KGML has a clear role here, but it also applies elsewhere. And I think, you know, I'm excited about a lot of things. That's another one of them that I probably didn't mention when I introduced myself. But yeah, the amount of progress we can make in kind of shifting the value system in our training as well.
So Cathy Wu, you're one of the few people who use the acronym FAIR.
Yes.
This is right in your wheelhouse, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. You know, in terms of biomedical community, this has been a movement, you know, for the last couple of decades at least. I mean, talking about data, metadata, the FAIR principles, so that data will be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Definitely, it's a great movement, but and I think you all are quite aware of the new Office of Data Science Strategy at NIH to foster the development and adoption of community standards. And this is actually very broad across the entire NIH Institute. So one great example is that how that community is embracing this is illustrated by this call from National Institute of Aging, one of the institutes at NIH. And so they have a call for proposal to ask the community to develop AI machine learning deep learning approaches towards therapeutic target discovery and disease diagnosis. But they have a companion call to build infrastructure for harmonization of Alzheimer's disease genetic, epigenetic, and clinical data, because they realize that those AI machine learning, deep learning approaches won't function unless the data is harmonized. And so there's a companion effort to try to build this kind of cyber infrastructure and certainly the common standards. So I think this is certainly a great direction, and it's going to benefit our community greatly.
Oh, terrific. Let's we still have some interesting ground to cover in a couple of different topical areas. So I think we'll move on to education. And Cathy Weathers, sorry to point directly at you from the get-go, but I know you're involved in training programs that cross certainly subdisciplines and even disciplines too. And as you imagine, you know, trying to bring a new topic like KGML to an entire area like ecology, for example, you know, what are the educational challenges and opportunities that you could see?
Yeah, so I think previously there was already discussion about some of the modules or, you know, the kind of one-day workshop. So I think those type of development, the materials is going to be extremely important for us to provide the kind of entry materials for our students to be able to take on those undergraduate and graduate courses, to have opportunity to do some of this kind of fundamental understanding. So I think, again, a lot of materials that we can develop together as a community and to try to share, and also bringing a lot of the hands-on, the hackathons, different type of competitions that will allow students to better connect their data with the tools. I think that would also be great.
Oh, terrific. I've been hoping to get back-to-back Cathy responses. Kathleen Weathers.
Yeah, if I could add to that a little bit. Many of you may know that Paul and I and others have been working on a fellowship program that brings cohorts of students from different institutions together to work on a particular science question using new analytics. And that would be a great place to do some KGML. So that kind of thing that's extracurricular, it's outside of or in addition to a graduate training program or an early career training program. I think that's one model that could work really well. And it's different from a workshop because it's not about coming together for a few days, learning a tool, and then going away. And if me, I forget the tool unless I used it. So that's one opportunity. But as we were going through the workshop this week, I started to think about some other possibilities. And one of them that I haven't heard about using these kinds of tools is the data science program. So in traveling around to universities, I've heard a lot about data science programs. Most of them that I've heard about are coming out of computer science. And when I talk to people in my domain, in ecosystem science, and ask them whether they're taking courses or whether they're engaged, the answer is always no. They don't even know that there's a data science program. So it seems to me that there's some real opportunities under the data science umbrella at various institutions. So that's another possibility. And the other is, in thinking about the world that Jordan represents and the world that Gray talked about, what are the opportunities with partnerships with federal agencies, with a place like USGS, and Jordan, I know that you've had some experience with this, or Gray with Google. I mean, are there possibilities there where we can foster KGML real learning and experience? So
great. Care to jump in?
I don't think I should speak to that. I will. Let me. Jordan should really be saying what I'm about to say. But my experience with the federal agencies in my particular domain area is that there's been just a step change, a sea change, and I in the last 18 to 12 months, we've really seen that. One of the questions on the email on the list is, what roadblocks do you see in your discipline? And I was looking for an opportunity to say this, but I think my answer now is that I don't know. I think if you had asked me 6 or 12 months ago, I would have had a laundry list of things that could change. But I think what I see happening right now is that there's so much acceleration, and there's so much work, and there's so much work to do, and both really interesting new work and integrating these things into operational systems. And I kind of feel like we're on a downhill slide, and we don't really. There's so much in front of us right this minute that I'm not sure that we know what the roadblocks are. But all I want to say there is that my experience with the agencies that I work with is that all of a sudden they're extremely interested in it.
Well said. Great. Just to add a note about opportunities with agencies, I think that is a clear strategy for engagement and improvement in the work we do, and also in the workforce development activities that I think USGS and other agencies are kind of recognizing is not as much about who are the postdocs or who are the people that are graduating. Here are our jobs that are possibilities, and more about reaching individuals at the undergraduate level or early grad school and developing, in some cases, relationships. And that helps us in a number of different ways because it allows an agency to tap into a market that is in many cases more diverse. And it also kind of sets seeds that start to propagate within peer groups. If you're connecting with high school students or undergraduate students or early graduate students, those are typically social creatures that talk about their experiences. If you are able to set up a real opportunity to contribute to a societal problem like we deal with in water, not enough, too much, the wrong quality type problems, that can have major positive impacts on students' lives, and also can connect, through their peer group and make, increase the awareness of the types of problems we're solving, and also the type of information we're providing to the public and decision makers.
Imme, I know you have something to say on this. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I see a lot of enthusiasm happening. I just totally back up what Gray and Jordan were just saying. I see this snowball at the top of the hill that's starting to roll. Like a few years ago, when I went to NOAA, for example, I was knocking on their door and there wasn't that much enthusiasm for artificial intelligence. Right now, they're in the middle of planning a NOAA Center for Artificial Intelligence to train their own workforce and to coordinate efforts across NOAA. They're really, really getting into AI right now. And I think the same is true for lots of other agencies. So I think we can stop trying to convince people it's useful. But now the next question is how to make it trustworthy, operational, and all that stuff. But there's lots and lots of interest. And so right now is, of course, a perfect opportunity to think about what should be the standards for when AI should be used, or what does explainable AI mean? How do we teach it, and all those things. So I think this is exactly the right time to be talking about this and really think about what kind of standards we think should be set.
Yeah. So Ryan, out of all of us, you're the one who is closest to the direct graduate student experience. And I'm wondering, what your thoughts are on, if you could imagine a training program that could be effective, over the course of the next few years. What are there a couple of pieces of that you think are really important?
Yeah, I think often what people are lacking when they get into applied machine learning research, and I've seen this just in the last couple of years of my PhD, I became sort of a go-to resource. People figured out that I was the guy who did machine learning. So there were some newer graduate students and undergrads coming to my office, and they were meteorology students or earth science students. And they were like, hey, I'm trying to start doing machine learning and I have no idea where to start. I have no idea what to read. I have no idea, should I be taking classes from Coursera, or should I be reading this book, or should I be reading that book, or should I be reading up on statistics? So some of the common themes I discovered are that, for one thing, people just don't have enough of a background in statistics. And actually, I was shocked when I took my first graduate level class on statistics. It was on statistical meteorology, and the stuff being taught in this graduate level 500 or 600 level class was it was really basic. It was stuff that I learned in Stats 100 when I was a freshman. But the reason that they were teaching such basic freshman level stuff in a graduate level stats course is a lot of the people coming into our graduate program weren't forced to take an undergraduate statistics course, which I was absolutely shocked by. I was just floored that people could have a degree in atmospheric science or earth science or something of the like and not have a single course in statistics. So that was just crazy to me. And I think that's a lot of what trips people up when they're trying to do applied machine learning, coming from the domain science side and then trying to do machine learning, is that they don't understand the fundamental statistics. So often they can grasp the code and they can train the models and they get really into computer programming, but they don't know how to apply machine learning correctly, like just splitting their training and testing data set and making sure that the training and testing data set are independent. That's something that's completely foreign to a lot of people, actually. So yeah, I think that's one big area where we could help, is making sure that people have access to the proper training in statistics. And I think also there were 2 graduate courses that I took on statistics, both in our meteorology program, and neither of those graduate level courses really mentioned machine learning. And there were a lot of other places in my graduate and undergraduate courses that would have been perfect places to mention machine learning. And I'm not faulting the professors for not doing it, because this is such an emerging thing. But I think if I were planning a curriculum now, if I were teaching a course, for example, on the boundary layer, where I talk about the boundary layer parameterizations we use inside weather models, a lot of those are based on machine learning, or the surface layer parameterizations, or the cloud physics parameterizations, or the radiation parameterizations. There's a lot of places in our field where machine learning is already ubiquitous, and people don't necessarily realize it. A lot of this machine learning stuff is under the hood and it's hidden away from the end user. So there's a lot of places where if you were teaching a course in the domain science and meteorology, for example, you could bring up machine learning and spend 1 or 2 lectures on it. And you could say, hey, we have this empirical approximation. This empirical approximation was developed via machine learning. And here's a little bit of background on the machine learning tools used to develop this approximation. So I think it would be a really good idea to pepper that throughout our curriculum, because machine learning has just become so ubiquitous in earth science that there's so many different places we could talk about it.
Yeah, agreed. Before we go over to a few questions that we have on Slido, Gray, you had a few sentences you wanted to say.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to just second what Ryan said. As someone who teaches geostatistics in a geoscience department, I couldn't agree with what he said more. Maybe it comes across as a little condescending, but I would really like to be teaching a machine learning class, but I can't.
Well, timing is everything. Okay, well, we lost Gray. If Gray comes back, I will pick him up. Imme, you want to take us on to the next question?
Do you mind if I add?
Go ahead,
he comes back.
Hey, let me jump in. Gray, you froze. So you said you want to teach it, but you can't.
Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, I really wanted to teach machine learning class, but I can't because the students don't have the right statistical background. And the major challenge is that we are the curriculum is already so full because earth science is chemistry, physics, biology, geology, hydrology, and now this is important for everything. So where do we put it, and how do we get,
Yep, great point. Thank you. Okay, Cathy Wu, and then we'll go to the Slido.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that when we have this kind of cross-campus data science initiative, it really helps us to build a kind of training educational program. So for example, we have 11 degree programs that have some data science flavor, more than 40 courses with some data science flavor. And so it really allows students to take some, fundamental data science courses from computer science, mathematics, statistics, but also applications like machine learning for public policy, data science tools for evidence policy or geospatial data science and so forth. So again, I think to bring the resources across campus and across institutions would be a great asset.
All right, anybody else on this topic? All right, so we have some more related questions from Slido. So I start with this one. Is the future of KGML bringing together machine learning experts with the domain experts, or is there potential for training scientists at the interface? And then maybe a related question that is very close. Hold on, it disappeared. Okay, it's gone. So let's just stick with that question. And again, the question was, is it way to bringing together people, or is it to train people at the interface? What do you think is the way to go?
My answer to that would be yes, both. And it was really interesting yesterday at the end of the day, the panel discussion touched on some of these, and the questions for the panelists, who were mostly early career, as I recall. The panelists responded by saying, no, I don't expect people to be fully conversant in any one particular, or cross domain rather, but rather it's bringing people together to collaborate where there are strengths from each of the domains: computer science, machine learning, and domain science. So, and I tend to think that as well, that the challenge will always be being a generalist and not a specialist. And the way our culture is set up right now, we still need to have specialists within domains and this collaboration at the interface. So I think it's a collaboration opportunity.
I will just throw in, then we need to really teach our students interdisciplinary skills, which is yet another skill set. And we get into that with the next question, but any more takes on this question?
Speaking as someone who was trained at the interface of atmospheric science and machine learning, but all the machine learning training for me was kind of ad hoc. It happened throughout undergraduate internships and whatnot. It's really, really hard to learn both topics thoroughly. And I know that as an undergrad and master's student, and even as a PhD student, and even probably now as a postdoc in ways that I don't recognize, I've muddled through a lot of the machine learning stuff because I didn't have a strong background in computer science. I only took one computer science course in my entire academic career. So I know that I muddled through a lot of things and went down a lot of rabbit holes and did a lot of things wrong that if I had had more of a computer science background, I could have saved myself a lot of time and I wouldn't have done all those things wrong. But then if I had more of a computer science background, I wouldn't have had enough time to learn the atmospheric science that I needed. So it's a really, really tough trade-off. I mean, I don't want to advocate against training people at the interface because I think it's wonderful to be strong in both subjects now that I've gotten through my 3 degrees and now that I'm, now that I have a pretty firm knowledge in both subjects, it's really nice to be a domain science expert and to also know the machine learning well enough that I'm not constantly going to machine learning experts. Notice that I didn't call myself a machine learning expert. I'm a little more guarded on that. Yeah, the whole point of that was that training at the interface is difficult because you're always going to be stronger in one area than another. So it's I think the right answer is a combination of both. You do have to train people at the interface, but it's great to have access to someone who knows the other side of the problem. So if you're a domain scientist, having access to machine learning experts. I did have that briefly when I was on a PhD internship at Google. They brought in people from Google DeepMind and Google Brain to work with our team. So I was the meteorologist and they were the machine learning experts. And it was really great to just, it really helped accelerate my research because it kept me from going down a lot of rabbit holes that I probably would have gone down. So I think the answer is that you need to bring together experts from both sides of the same problem, but you also need to train at the interface. And finding the correct balance is, that's just an iterative thing that you have to figure out, I think.
Great. Yeah, to add to that, I agree completely. To put a little language around it, I think there's also a need to have some kind of baseline computational and or data literacy to ease those collaborations, be it whether you lean in one direction or the other, that sure helps move things along in a more efficient manner with collaborations. And then the second thing I wanted to ask, maybe in a provocative sense, is I'm really excited about all the different things that are coming together that make all of this really exciting for all of us right now. And I think one of those things that maybe we haven't said out loud is the fact that these problems that are being solved with KGML are of interest to both sides. There's almost equal novelty in the problem space for the different groups. And I think that is pretty rare, at least in my experience, where there isn't kind of a subordinate relationship where it's kind of like, oh, my domain is solving the meat and potatoes problem while this other collaborative domain is solving the really exciting problem for their discipline. I think there's mutual excitement across all of these different groups. And the provocative part of that is, do we think it will last like that? Or do we think the balance will potentially shift in the future? And one reason I have optimism there is because we're hearing from a lot of very different domains that are all kind of lining up. And traditionally, these domains move at very different speeds. with technology and with data and with the community feel. So that does make me feel pretty optimistic that there is so much in the problem space that this energy and excitement will continue well into the future.
Yeah, so a perfect segue to just something I also wanted to say that's also very provocative. And just to preface this, I'm very much a domain scientist. My experience so far in the cross-disciplinary teams has been that we need them more than they need us, that we need the computer scientists more than they need the domain scientists. And just as if you look at, of course, both are necessary, but if you look at the mix, and the only reason for that is because the new thing that's really happening is the machine learning. I mean, for at least, maybe that's not fair to say, but they're both PhD level subjects. Every aspect of earth science is a PhD level subject. But there's several different aspects of machine learning that are in and of themselves, and data science that are in and of themselves PhD level subjects. And I think that that this will, what Jordan's talking about, this will maintain as a really like long-term, really productive field of science if we can make that intersection also something like a PhD level subject.
I wanted to maybe chime in on the Berkeley view. So for the last 5 years, we've tried to do exactly this, have convinced computer science undergrads or grad students in UC Berkeley to pick up science problems, and then convince scientists to work with computer scientists who are machine learning experts. And I would say that I think we've had a really hard time convincing CS undergrads and grads to work with scientists. For them, the prospect of working at Google or working on a self-driving car or making 3 to 5 times more money than you could make as if you were a scientist is just vastly more attractive. So I think we've had a really tough time. Now, the other way around, convincing domain scientists to work on machine learning, I think that's proven to be easy. And my experience has been that physicists are very smart and they can pick up stuff as needed. And I think they found it really easy. I think if you look at all domain sciences, you will note that the Large Hadron Collider community has really been the top one in terms of adopting machine learning, and even baking it into the FPGAs and so on the LHC detector. So I think it's been relatively easier to convince domain scientists to pick up machine learning methods. Now, people at that interface, and frankly, I think there are very, very few people really at that interface. But I think I am seeing new generation of PhDs, new generation of postdocs who are convincing their PhD advisor that I really want to do machine learning. And I think there's a little more skepticism at the PhD advisor level in maybe choosing a dissertation topic that would be purely on machine learning. But I think I'm seeing the other way around. Grad students, postdocs are successfully convincing their mentors in academia that they want to pursue machine learning for the next 3 to 5 years. So that is a trend which is happening. Not as many PhDs in computer science departments on science problems.
Just one other comment about the value of having collaboration with different domains is all the evidence that's coming out that suggests that diversity with a capital D, which includes different domains, results in more transformative and interesting scientific products and other products. So there's another value in not having all of the expertise and knowledge in one person, just because it expands the diversity of questions we ask and the answers we find.
All right, that sounds like it brings us right to the topic of interdisciplinary collaboration. And maybe we start out with, many people don't even know that there's a whole field called interdisciplinary studies that can teach people how to become better interdisciplinary collaborators. Does anybody want to point to anything or point out anything how do we teach students to do interdisciplinary work? How can we help them?
I can jump in again. I think there are probably many different ways, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the interdisciplinary programs at universities have picked these up. But increasingly, there are people out there who are teaching collaboration skills. It's under the umbrella of team science. So that's one opportunity that I think any of us should take advantage of, because there's much to be learned about collaboration. So I think that that's moving to the fore, but it's not a normal part of anybody's training. So I think there are more opportunities, but you still have to look for them.
Yeah, I will throw out that in this KGML project that is NSF supported, we have the Science of Team Science team from CSU is part of this proposal. So they're helping us. They gave us at our initial workshop that we had among us, they gave us lessons on how to do team science and how to be more open-minded. And there are lots of papers on interdisciplinary habits of the mind and things like that. Any more comments? Okay. Another question is, what would help with community development?
I'm sorry I'm late to the party, but I have one last comment on the last question. Maybe worth mentioning that there are pure computer science groups doing climate science. There's papers, a famous one that I can't remember the title of off the top of my head, about what are the open problems in climate science that computer science can attack. And there's like a heat map, like this area of computer science might be beneficial for solving this area of climate science. And it's very much a paper aimed at the computer science community. And so one of the things that we may think about in the context of this workshop is I think a lot of us here and a lot of the speakers and a lot of the people here are really domain scientists that are working toward collaborating. But I do think there's a world of people that are coming the other direction, that maybe there'd be some use in sort of reaching out to them. There's several private ventures that come out of tech companies like Jupyter Labs, for example, that maybe aren't represented in our sort of academic circles that we've invited to be at this conference. Sorry to.
Great. Did you have anything else to add? You were muted at the end.
No, I'm sorry to distract. I totally ruined your introduction to the next question. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Imme, I wonder if you should just repeat the question.
The question about community development? Or, okay. So the question we had was, what would help with community development? And I think it's just generally an open-ended question as to where do we go from here? How do we develop this as more than just one workshop and then everybody going their own ways? Is there something we can take from here? Is there something we should create?
I think it would be great if we can post some challenges to gather scientific use cases from the community who have really, impactful problems that they would like to solve that require this framework, and try to bring meaningful problems and scientific experts together. So some kind of challenges, hackathons, I mean, the events that would allow people to post their problems and their ideas.
So something like KGML benchmarks that include the data, the question, but it has to be challenging enough so that you can't solve it with regular methods. Any other thoughts? Ryan.
Yeah, I found one thing that really helps with community development is just creating notebooks. So Jupyter notebooks or Colab notebooks or whatever it may be, but interactive resources where I feel like they're beneficial. At least the notebooks that I've created, and when I've been part of these tutorials, it's always been teaching domain scientists about the machine learning side of things. But I imagine that these resources would also be useful for computer scientists coming towards the domain science and trying to understand that side of it. But I've gotten a lot of good feedback and noticed that these interactive resources are used by a lot of people. So if you have a Jupyter notebook or Colab notebook that's easily accessible online and easily usable, where people can just people can open it up and start running the code and they can see it in action, and they can see the machine learning and the weather data, or the machine learning and the geology data, or the machine learning and the chemistry data, or whatever, if they can see those two things come together before their eyes and everything is there for them and they can interact with it, I find that really it increases understanding and it increases buy-in as well.
All right. I give the panelists just a moment because we didn't tell them this in advance, but we would like to ask all of you for some final thoughts soon. Before we go to that, we'll give you a moment to think about what you want your final thoughts to be. Still, is there something on the cross-disciplinary collaboration that we should be discussing? For example, what is the role of networks and communities to reach across institutions to leverage technical and human resources? Anybody wish to comment on that before we go to the closing statements?
I can just say briefly, I think there's potentially a huge role, and this kind of relates to the question that we just talked about. You know, coming out of this workshop, it seems to me that there could be some tools that could come out of it and could be shared across the community. They could be shared very specifically within networks, and I'll use the Global Ecological Observatory Network as one example, where there are members who would be very interested in that kind of thing. But the other opportunity, I think, is with both national and international meetings and with networks, is bringing in some of the experts from this community who have different examples, having them run workshops, having them engage with a working group about about solving a particular problem. So it's connecting and finding venues that range from seminars to workshops to working groups that would make a big difference, I think.
Anyone else care to comment before we go to the closing statements? All right, do we have a volunteer for who wants to go first for your final thoughts?
I can do it if you want.
I think Prabhat just volunteered.
Oh, okay.
So we have Prabhat first and Ryan second.
Okay. So I think, maybe overall, 5 years ago, I think there was a question mark on whether AI and modern deep learning had a role in science. And I think there's now enough evidence through papers at Nature, Science, PNAS, domain science journals that there is a lot of value. So I think, Imme, as you said, I think we are now moving on. We're not questioning the value or the relevance of AI in science anymore, but we are moving on to more advanced core issues around challenges that we need to take on as a community. The DoD was first to funding such projects. NSF and NIH are now starting to catch up. And even in the DOE where I am, I think we expect substantial programmatic funding that would span a decade or more. I think there's a host of rich short-term and long-term problems that again, the researchers may be listening in on the call today can undertake. Knowledge-guided machine learning is definitely a very prominent theme. So again, I'm glad that this workshop sort of came together and touched upon many of the challenges. But really, I think there's just so much opportunity, so many open problems to work on that this is, a great area, I think, for researchers to engage in. Thanks.
Thank you. Ryan?
So Prabhat already said part of what I was going to say, which is that the climate around applied and interdisciplinary machine learning has changed so much in the last 5 years or so. I remember when I first started doing this stuff 8.5 years ago, when I was the one weird guy in the corner who did machine learning, and everyone was like, well, why are you doing that? Why don't you just use physical models? And now, well, I'm still the weird guy in the corner who does machine learning, but now people come to me and they want to know about machine learning. So it goes back to what Imme was saying earlier in the panel discussion, that 5 years ago, one of our biggest problems was convincing domain scientists that machine learning was worth using. And now our biggest problem is that every domain scientist and their dog wants to use machine learning, and we have to teach them how to do it in a way that's responsible and effective. And I think people who are at this intersection between physical science and machine learning have a huge responsibility now. One thing that I've noticed is a lot of domain scientists are starting to see machine learning as a solution waiting for a problem. So they see all this machine learning coming out in journal papers and whatnot. They see that convolutional neural nets are being used for everything, and UNets are being used for everything, and LSTM is being used for everything, and they want to use the fancy new tool too. They want to get in on the game. And a lot of times people come to me with a problem that they think is ripe for machine learning. And I'm like, well, I don't think machine learning is the right tool for the job. So I think that's one of the big responsibilities we have, is teaching people when to use machine learning and when not to use machine learning. And also when it comes to the different tools, you know, there's times that you don't need a convolutional neural net or a self-attention neural net or a UNet or something like that. There's times that just doing a linear regression will suffice. So I think one of the big responsibilities we have is teaching people where to use machine learning, where to use certain machine learning tools, and then how to do machine learning properly, how to do it in a way that's statistically fair, so that you're not overfitting and misrepresenting your performance, how to do it in a way that's robust and stable, so that when you train a model on archive data and then put it into the field and use it in real time, it doesn't completely break. There's a lot of things that we have a responsibility to teach the other people at this intersection of domain science and machine learning, because we want to make sure that that people are doing it right and doing it in a sustainable way, so that the hype curve doesn't crash in 5 years when a lot of irresponsible machine learning has been done, and then the funding institutions see that and say, well, we're not going to fund machine learning anymore. So.
So some thoughts I had to add in closing are just to underscore the importance on some of the things we touched on briefly, such as the importance of creating some interpretable visual components for what we do. And I really wish I'd seen some of Ryan's talks earlier, that because he described with words some of the pieces that I think often we're missing, and kind of bridging people on to some level of understanding what these models are doing and what it means. So to just kind of put a to bold interpretability and visual presentation of what the models are doing and what they're made up of. And then I also want to push us to move beyond some of our performance metrics as the way that we're kind of jousting with other modelers, especially across domains. I know I'm not saying I'm not guilty of this very thing, but I don't think that we're doing well to bridge the gap with, for example, process-based modelers by kind of focusing on root mean squared error, NSE, because it's just always, oh, they used a different data set, there's a different domain, there's a different time range, there's all of these things that make that not an apples to apples comparison. And I think this term is a bit negative, but I think it's got some promise, which is the idea of embarking on some adversarial modeling, where you've got co-authors that are collegial and interested in the collaboration, but they also believe a certain modeling approach is better. And to have both of those approaches represented in the same paper with experts on both for both of those approaches, contributing to comparable results in that sense, and having the ability to, in that way, make some progress with the field. And just one other thing to say about RMSE is to also get down to better connections with what true users of the model results really need, which is not necessarily the performance at any given point of a time series that happens to have an observation, in space and time, but some periods of the year, some locations have more value to decision making than others. So making sure that those caveats make their way into how we build and explain and deliver modeling results. So, thanks.
I just wanted to reinforce the framework, the KGML, MLKG, that I think it's just so powerful. We're not talking about applying machine learning approaches to complex Earth system problems necessarily, but it's the KGML part that I think is so powerful and has been so revealing in this workshop. So I'd like to stress and that it can go beyond physical models, that again, biogeochemical models as well is I think profoundly important. But that it be a back and forth, KGML, MLKG, So some of the forwards and backwards that was talked about yesterday.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Gray, you want to go next?
Sure, then you can be that final word. Okay. So I just want to second what Ryan said, that it's just been really surprising to me how overwhelmingly fast this transition has been, and that's super exciting to me. I think one of the things, I have this imagination, I wasn't involved in planning this conference, but I just have in my imagination, especially reading some of the conference organizers' previous papers, that they spent a lot of time and probably many sessions both in the university and at the nearby pubs and coffee shops trying to decide exactly what to call it, knowledge-guided machine learning rather than physics-guided machine learning, or theory-guided machine learning, or theory-guided data science, or some of these other things. And I just want to point out here that I don't actually think this conversation is about machine learning. I think it's about the value of information in data and the value of information in theory, or science, or what we could traditionally think of as science. And I think that the big open question that I see is that I don't think any discipline really understands, but I think we're getting closer. Certainly, I think it's an approachable problem, is really understanding the value and characteristics of our data, our big data sets, and really understanding what they're telling us about that we can generalize, and then coming up with new tools to generalize these things. So I think I'd frame the question slightly different than KGML. I think I'd talk about information and data and information in theory. And I think that what machine learning is doing is really opening the door to letting us think about this question in new ways. It's our first really great tool. Statistics was great, going back to Ron Fisher, and even the Bayesians, if you want to go back further, or depending on how you want to define Bayesian statistics, but was great, but none of that stuff is really nearly as powerful as this machine learning has been. And what I think it's really doing is helping us explore data.
Mm-hmm. So that's great. That's exactly the point that I think it's, I totally agree. I feel like embracing this to address the problems, the data, big data problems. So I think probably the greatest impact of this knowledge-guided machine learning framework is how it could become an effective instrument for us to address impactful societal problems, and where there are a lot of data sets generated that needs to be turned into insight, into actionable effort, policies, and so forth. So again, I feel like to have that societal impact as kind of the end goal of developing this framework is going to be quite important, because it can really touch everything: health science, physical science, environmental science, behavior, social science, public policy. And so, yeah, to have those kind of impactful, community-driven scientific use cases that can really demonstrate why AI, machine learning, deep learning, why the knowledge-guided machine learning framework, to me, that would be impactful.
Thank you so much, everyone. With that, we will turn it back over to Vipin for a final thank you to everyone. And before we do that, I just wanted to thank Vipin, because he's been our fearless leader over the past year. He's the PI of this whole project, and he's been leading the whole charge of having this workshop. It was his vision, and thank you, Vipin, for leading us here.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. This was a fantastic panel, a great end to 3 days of workshop. I learned a lot listening to everybody. It's just a fire hose. And I just like to thank the NSF, the Harnessing the Data Revolution program, which provided support for this workshop. This setting, this Zoom setting, would not have been possible without the efforts of the human technical team. Many of you talked to the speakers one-on-one. And really, it was a collaborative effort of the entire organizing team, Paul, Imme, and everybody else you heard from. But I'm really thankful to all the speakers and panelists, especially those who are not from our project. You contributed so much, you enlightened us so much. And the audience, of course, for participation and also for asking questions, some of which got answered, others, of course, there were far too many, we are archiving them. But please feel free to contact the speakers directly on as opposed to what we're going to do next. Actually, Laura, who has been really the backbone of this workshop and has been in touch with every one of you who are speaking and participating, has already put up all the slides for which we have permission on the website, and about half of the videotapes of the sessions that have happened so far, not the ones today. And what I'm noticing is that many people are already watching them, so they're getting great views already from the audience. We have about 1,050 registrations. 100 of them showed up in the last few days, which means it sort of spread through the word of mouth. And all of the ideas that you talked about, I think, are going to help us, help the community. And we will be sort of putting as many of these resources as we can muster on the website of this workshop. So thank you again. Thanks, everyone. And I'm so glad we could manage to do it under the current circumstances and make it so productive. But it could not have been done without everyone's help. Right? Have a, I guess, like this would be the close of the meeting. And I guess be safe and be careful in these current times.